So what's the biggest difference that strikes you about the opening between the two versions?
Well, the first version has all these repeated notes. Yeah. And that's been changed in the second version to. So it's, instead of it's which kind of makes it easier to control the balance. Yes, it's easier, but I think that Rachmaninoff probably had his reasons musically for doing this.
What reasons do you think these are?
Well, just to make it clearer, the texture is clearer, and it's much easier to make it clearer in the second version.
Our drilly friend is back.
He also liked to put a drill in the second version, apparently. There are also some small differences in the sort of lines and things that he then creates with the second version, just right at the beginning. So this kind of issue here there, and then in the first version. So it's just that's different. Then this is the same, and then it just continues. It's the second version, but the first version. So it just continues in the same sort of fashion. And then when we come to this bit here, this bit, in the first version, there are some changes in the left hand, basically. So we have. So I'm just showing the left hand more there, and then in the second version it does. So this is the D flat. Sorry. And then he opts to actually take away all of this bass, and I think actually the reason for that is that he's trying to. This piece is very loud in general, and we're on at a particular moment where we're diminuendoing to this quieter passage, and it actually says ritenuto poco meno mosso, so and it's piano as opposed to what we had before, which was forte, so it's quite a big change actually. So what he does instead of, he does just, right? So we have quite a big paring down of notes, so the whole thing. And then actually this line becomes available, whereas before it was that with the bass. And then from this point it's. That's all the same in both versions. So that's really it. But I think the sort of arcing trope, if you like, throughout this beginning, the changes that he's made in the second movement, second edition, it's always to make the texture clearer, with a sort of added undertone of, because if you make the texture clearer, it sort of already suggests that you're paring down notes and therefore, of course, making things easier. So yes, the second edition is easier. It's much easier to do that than, of course. I think that there are many different opinions about, which version should you play as a pianist. I have learned the first version, but I think I'll probably learn the second version a bit. But what Horowitz did was put the two together. I think he actually, all the recordings I've heard, there may be a recording that I haven't heard where he doesn't do this, but I'm pretty sure he actually plays the second version at the beginning. So he sort of chops and changes, but this whole first movement was completely reworked in some areas actually. That I think is definitely much more musical. And I think the reason for that comes down to the sort of dynamic shape of the piece, which is primarily forte. It's sort of a typical Russian thing. You see it in Tchaikovsky's symphonies, for example, where it's like you have a forte passage followed by another forte passage followed by a fortissimo passage. So you have
followed
to
by cannons.
Yes. So you have to, as an interpreter of that kind of music, you have to find variation in it. But I think Rachmaninoff is kind of helping us out in the second version. I hope I'm not selling the second version too much. That's not what I'm trying to do. But that's basically it.
So how does this affect you? If there are different versions of the piece you are playing, have a look. If there are scores available, do look at them and see what the differences are and try and figure out why the composer changed them. This doesn't mean you have to learn to play both versions and then kind of fight about which one you should be playing. Think about which one to play. If you like another version better, then maybe you'll play that version instead. But this just really gives you a bit more purpose in some of the sections that changed. You think, okay, why has this changed? How can I bring across the changes more so that the composer's work really shines as they want it? So, point number 2 to think about is the instrument you are playing, the instrument the piece was written for. And I don't just mean this in terms of arrangements, but also in terms of the history of instruments. So, I'm sorry, saxophonists in the class, clarinetists, this isn't going to really apply to you because your instrument is such a little new baby instrument. But all of the older instruments, this is definitely going to apply. This is particularly going to apply when you are playing early music, so kind of Bach and older. So strings are relatively similar. The actual body of violins, violas, cellos, double basses haven't particularly changed since this era. However, the main changes will be that strings back in the day of Bach were not made of kind of synthetic material or kind of metal wire. They were actually made of gut. So they would take, I believe it's sheep. They would take sheep guts and kind of bleach them, clean them, and then kind of stretch them out to wind them up, and then this kind of creates a softer sound. It's less kind of bright and tinny, it's much more mellow. And this is still the case. Harps still use gut strings very, very frequently because it's honestly, it's more painful to play than a violin. You're plucking literally all the time. If you're plucking nylon and synthetic instruments, it rips your fingers apart. You have to have nylon for the very top because it's too thin to be gut, but the main body will still be gut. There are also Baroque bows, so the bows were different ever so slightly, even if the actual body of the instruments weren't. So it's the very tip of the violin bow which is different, and this kind of changes the tension level of the bow. So it's less tense, it's much more clean when you play it. You can't put as much pressure on it as you can with modern bows, which are a bit more kind of robust and resilient, and this really changes the way that you can play early music. So now let's have a listen to the same piece, one on a modern bow and one on a Baroque bow.